Redditarian. Kindly subscribe and hit the bell button for more updates. What is your darkest family secret? In the film Driving Miss Daisy, when the chauffeur, played by Morgan Freeman, is driving Miss Daisy to worship service, they get stuck in a traffic jam. He gets out to see what the holdup is. When he gets back in, he says you won't be going to service today. Somebody done bombed the temple. Hebrew Benevolent Congregation Temple, Atlanta, 1958. She says what? Who would do such a thing? My uncle, that's who. Wasn't everyone acquitted in this case? Did your uncle ever admit to doing the bombing? Was he the main suspect? Sorry, that's a lot of questions. He was one of the 5 men arrested, but not the one tried and acquitted twice. I don't know if he ever confessed, but he was definitely the black sheep of the otherwise normal family. My dad, his sisters, and my other uncle rarely mentioned him, at least not while my cousins and I were around. But when I was little, I remember one of my older cousins saying something about my uncle and a church bombing. I thought better of asking dad about it, and basically forgot about it. Then, a few years ago, Elle was listening to the Missed in History podcast, and they did an episode on the bombing. When they listed the names of the men that were arrested, a giant light bulb went off in my head. My cousin, once removed, my parents' cousin, was kidnapped, raped, and tortured by a serial killer. She was, after many days, dropped off near a running path with her neck slit. She lived, unlike the other 3, and she could lead the police to his home. He is still in prison. As a child I heard whispering of it, and didn't find out the whole truth, until I was older. Edit, not great aunt. Second cousin. Edit 2, my cousin, once removed. Does he have the opportunity for parole, or will he die in prison? I think it would really freak me out if the chance of him getting out might be on the table at some point. My great-grandfather shot and killed a man in his grocery store back in the 30s over a poker game. He ran a speakeasy out of the back of his store and lost almost $2K, so as the guy was walking out the front after the store closed he shot him and got away with it by telling the police the man robbed him. It wasn't until he was on his deathbed he told my grandfather what had happened. Edit, this was in Ohio. No one in my family can give me a honest answer on how many siblings I have. Same. My father is 72 and I'm early 20s. He has about 8 kids that I know of. The youngest is 15 and the oldest is 49. My brother from my mother's side recently said he ran into my sister from my father's side. I had no idea who she was. Most of the family members I ask just say they've lost track. Edit, it definitely doesn't seem like a cultural thing, since we live in NSW, Australia. Edit, turns out the sister he ran into was actually my cousin who just looks a heck of a lot like my half-sister. Which is ironic, since she's the only one I know who is biracial, as her mother is Thai. Her dad's a massive hole lol. A year or 2 after her adoptive mother died, my mom went looking for information about her birth parents and found that her birth mom and her husband had been gruesomely murdered by a drug cartel. There was an article about their murder in Rolling Stone magazine that had gory pictures of their bodies. Must have been really shocking to her. Hope she's well now. Found out last year that I'm a direct descendant Thomas Rood. He was the first person to be executed for incest in the US. He raped his daughter Sarah, and it came to light when she gave birth to a son named George. My family line is descended from George. My dad's biological father was a Rood. I know almost nothing about that branch of my family tree, but we could be distant relatives. Tree. You have a family wreath, my friend. Father won the lottery and we've been pretending to be poor, so our family doesn't try to ask for money. Imanied about tree fiddy. I learned my disabled great aunt was raped multiple times while she was in high school, including by a teacher, and it resulted in at least 3 pregnancies that she was forced to carry and give up for adoption, and then shamed for. I found out because I did 23andMe and found cousins my dad couldn't explain, so there was a very awful phone call to understand why disabled women are at the highest risk for sexual assault. I'm so sorry. As someone with a disabled sister, that's always been one of my biggest fears. And I didn't even know about the statistics. The world is such a scary place. My brother shot himself in the leg to get out of Iraq and tried to blame it on an enemy attack. I learned about this the day I arrived in Afghanistan for my year-long tour. All I heard was that he was shot. I found out later it was a self-inflicted wound and he was out on suicide watch and was kicked out with a less than honorable discharge. He's never actually told anyone this. I just heard it through the National Guard, being kind of like a gossipy small town. I actually don't hold it against him. War sucked. He's absolutely ruined his life since then by becoming an alcoholic and sitting the world out. Just sad all around. Also, my mom and her sister married the same man, so all my siblings are also cousins with each other. I had an uncle who moved far away, worked in a boiler room at a huge casino, decades ago. He was always sketchy, and he had way more money than a simple boiler room employee ought to have had. Rumors that the boiler room was a really useful thing for the mob, due to boilers doubling as incinerators for certain purposes. Hence the money. Many unanswered questions there. Guess it's kinda obvious that your uncle got paid to look the other way while the mob used the boiler room to cook their pizzas. My mom walked in on my uncle servicing the best man a night before he married my aunt. This was the mid 1960s, so being bi or gay wasn't something many people admitted to. She said nothing to anyone, only told my dad years later. Edit. Wow, this blew up. I thought about deleting it because it's not really a dark family secret. Thank you for the nice comments and awards. Did the marriage last? They just celebrated their 57th anniversary. Actually, they're both retired teachers. They travel out and just enjoy life. I adore both of them. They're lovely people. My dad died of a drug overdose when he was only 25. I was 6 years old. Our family and his hid the true reason and told everyone it was a heart attack. This is even what I grew up thinking. Only my mom, my aunt, 2 uncles, and my 4 grandparents knew the real cause. I found out the real cause of his death when I had to get his death certificate for college financial aid, and now I'm burdened with continuing the light of the greater community who knew him. Edit. Holy hell, this blew up overnight. I'm trying to respond to all comments, but apologies if I can't. And thank you for the awards. One family member killed another by leaving a bag of poisoned donuts on the front steps. We are now hesitant about accepting donuts. Where do you live with such frivolous donut dispersion? That's what I wondered. Me, I rarely get offered donuts. My grandfather was killed in a bar when my father was still a toddler. The official story was that he was murdered over a pinball game. Back then pinball was pretty serious, I guess. It wasn't until recently my grandmother confessed on her deathbed that my grandfather actually killed someone and buried the body days before his own demise. So he was actually killed in retaliation for a murder that he committed. My grandmother kept this secret for almost 65 years. My dad gave a job to a cousin. I remember as a kid that this cousin I'd never heard of just suddenly popped up out of nowhere without explanation. But I was a kid so didn't really think of it. But everyone made a big deal out of how great it was for my dad to give him a job. I found out 20 years later that the cousin had been in prison for having a sexual relationship with a student. My friend was a superintendent and a teacher in the 80s. It was the norm. Still was through the 90s. He said he remembers teachers popping Adderall too to get through school. Kids were preyed on so much then. I found out 6 months before my dad died that he was a heroin addict earlier in his life. He was dying of liver disease and tried to overdose one night. I didn't live with him at the time, but knew something was wrong, and that's when my mom and I went and found him on the floor of his bathroom with a needle in his arm. Had an uncle that was a sharpshooter in the US Navy, and there's a famous movie about a mission he was on. He was also batshit crazy and beat his kids and was a serious hoarder. This whole thread has me wondering if becoming an uncle instantly turns you into an insane person. OMG, my dad is an uncle. My cousin sexually abused me when I was 7. He was 17. And it messed me up, and now I have to pretend I'm happy he's getting the organ transplant he needs. I hope he fucking dies. I was sexually abused by my brother with a similar age difference. It has also fucked me up a lot. I never told anyone in my family, and now that it's been over 20 years it feels weird at this point. You're not alone, and for what it's worth I hope your cousin's body rejects the new organ. Don't forget to subscribe.